Okay, so I'll just say welcome back to Geraldine Comiskey, a regular guest on Crime Guy. And today we are talking mainly about Sophie Toscan du Plantier because the anniversary of her death is coming up, and this may well go out on the anniversary of her death, the 29th anniversary. And then in the follow-up episode, a little bit later on, we'll be talking about Susie Lamplugh, who disappeared in the summer of 1986, so exactly 10 years before Sophie. So we're going to start talking today about the similarities between these two. So we'll start with the differences between the two. So Sophie was French. She was murdered in Ireland on a holiday just before Christmas, 96. And Susie has never been found. She just vanished literally into thin air one day in summer in 1986, 10 years earlier. So I think it was your idea actually to just talk about the differences and the similarities between them as a package deal, if you like. Most of the cases we've looked at over the years have been single females. You know, they normally are the victims, unfortunately, aren't they? But what have you found that are sort of some similarities between the two cases?
Okay, well, I think the thing, both of them were very glamorous, and they had this certain kind of, at the same time, they had this kind of girl next door type of appeal. Like, I mean, a lot of women could imagine being in their situation, even though obviously Sophie was very fabulously wealthy. It's still, she was a woman on her own, and she had a troublesome, she had a kind of, well, they said she had a troublesome marriage. Now they're saying, I don't know, that she wasn't, but there's kind of a bit of a dispute over that. I mean, he did have a baby with another woman shortly after she died. So anyway, Sophie was kind of, it was kind of complicated. She had an ex-husband and everything, so she was kind of every woman. A lot of women are in her situation, and she just went to Ireland for some peace and quiet. As everyone wants peace and quiet, especially busy mothers. She was so that was one thing. And Susie was kind of, a girl making her way in the world, her first serious job, and she had a very normal social life, and she had a very normal situation with her family where her parents obviously thought she was this kind of paragon of virtue, and yet she was leading a normal life of a young woman. So I think what they both had in common, they were kind of leading double lives in a good way, because I mean, you're obviously not going to tell your parents about your social life, all of it. So it was, I think everyone can relate to that. And then the fact that they were very glamorous made them very kind of charismatic to people, to everyone, men and women. So I think we all know people like Sophie and Susie, and who are kind of have similarities to them in real life, so we can really relate to them, or we can relate to people who know them. I mean, everyone. There are people like that in every community, I think.
Yes, it seems that they attracted attention for good reasons from good people, friends, colleagues, but also they've
Yeah,
attracted the attentions of whoever killed them or abducted them as well. I suppose
yeah,
that sort of works in both directions, doesn't it? They certainly stood out in their lives. They were sort of centers of social connections, if you like. Susie Lamplugh especially was very
yeah.
much an outgoing person, very sociable, um, out in a sales role as well. She had to be sociable as part of her work. Sophie obviously had the film connections and had to be sociable in that respect. But I think we know, don't we, that Sophie was really more of an introvert in terms of her natural tendencies. It was almost like her career forced her into the limelight, but she was never that happy in the limelight, I don't think.
Yeah, she wanted to be on her own, and she was a very creative person. And whereas I think Susie was more of a more level-headed, business-minded person, whereas Sophie was really artistic, and she wanted to make her own films. She liked writing, and and she saw the beauty in everything. I think, and kind of, she was kind of overwhelmed by beauty, and by things that other people mightn't find beautiful, like she found dead animals, for example, and she would sort of write something that was poetic about that, and turn it into a story. So, and she had a kind of a fascination with the macabre. She was kind of, I think she was very goth, Sophie was, whereas Susie was more, I'd say she was probably what would have been considered more mainstream. Maybe Sophie was more mainstream, but at the time, Susie would have been more the normal girl. But so
Hmm.
that was probably their difference.
So let's look at Sophie sort of as in isolation, and then we'll come on later to Susie separately. I suppose the question that first came to my mind when I was planning this episode, because I've written about this case for so many years now, and I keep thinking that I've finished writing about it because nothing's really changed. The police investigations hit the skids. It's just delayed year after year. We can talk about the Jim Sheridan film later, but why do you think we're still talking about Sophie? Is it just simply that it's never been solved and lots of people will be interested in these cases that are never solved?
There are a lot of unsolved ones. I just read one I'd never heard about it just earlier today. So, and it happened around not long after Sophie, I think. So I'm kind of amazed that and I'm not amazed that it's still in the news. I'm just amazed that other cases aren't getting the same attention. So all I can think of is, there's lots of glamorous women too. So they don't seem to get remembered. So I don't know if it's a combination of all these factors, or maybe it's because of where it happened in West Cork, which is kind of a snobby area. It's an area, and it's an area where you don't expect things to happen. Is the fact that they picked on one man and decided to make him the chief suspect, and he fought and fought against it for years. I think it's as much because of Ian Bailey that it's remembered as Sophie, because it's kind of a tragedy where, one person was murdered and the other person was, his whole life is ruined, and he was a flawed character as well. So I think it was all this, and it was the place it was in, snobby location. It was kind of like, why do people watch Midsummer Murders on TV instead of watching, if that was set in kind of a really rough location, it would have set in a beautiful little village and it has lots of kind of nice people and aristocrats and genteel kind of people. But it's the same with West Cork. It has this image of being a place with celebrities where they have their holiday homes, and then it has kind of rustic local people, fishermen. And I'm not saying fishermen are all rustic, but it has that image, that like say Cornwall, like some things set in where Wycliffe, that old thing that was set in Cornwall, and certain places lend themselves to the imagination more. So West Cork is a very beautiful, rugged place. It's also a place that attracts the rich and famous, and Sophie happened to be one of those. So I think maybe that's why that case has endured.
Yeah, now you mention it, there's lots of reasons why it would still be in the news. She's kind of young, attractive, a
Yeah.
tourist effectively from France, quite wealthy or quite well known in France, but hardly known at all in Ireland. And then you've got that clash of the cultures. You've got this suspect who's a giant of a man and very loud as well and brash.
Somebody described him. Yeah, but another journalist described him as like a Shakespearean actor. Ralph Riegel said Ian Bailey when he saw him, he was like a Shakespearean actor. His voice and his appearance when he was young, he was a very, very handsome man. He really should have been on the stage, or he should have been in the movies. And he mightn't have been, he might have had a lovely life if he had done that. But he had this kind of almost like kind of the Richard Burton type of thing. He could have played Heathcliff, So I thought, he could have played Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights or something. Oh yeah, there was the other thing. It was a multinational thing. It wasn't just France and Ireland either. It was Britain as well, because he was British, and there was a Welsh connection. Jules was from Wales, so it was kind of British, French, and Irish.
One interesting aspect of it from a British perspective is that really we did not know about this at all until well, in my case, it was the Audible podcast when I very first heard of it, but it
Yeah.
kind of it was in the background until the Jim Sheridan series came out. But it for some reason there were a couple of articles at the time, but it never really took hold here in the way that Susie Lamplugh did, for example. And Susie Lamplugh is still quite a well-known case, even amongst the younger generation. But I suspect Sophie, being from Ireland like you are, she's your Susie Lamplugh in many ways. It's the one case, maybe a bit like Madeleine McCann, there's the girl who went missing.
Well, Madeleine McCann everyone remembers Madeleine McCann here. I know there was an Irish connection with her too, but it's just her father's family were from Ireland. But I do think the Sophie thing, I'm surprised that it hasn't attracted more attention in Britain, really. Maybe it was something to do with Ian Bailey's colleagues kind of resented him, and they knew of him as an attention seeker, and they didn't want to give him more attention. It could have been that. This would be a very Irish perspective too. If you think someone is an attention seeker, people tend not to give them attention. They tend to push back against that. I think the British have that in common with. I think it's an Anglo-Irish thing. You see somebody who shows off too much, and even if it's a crime, oh, look at that fella showing off again, and he wants attention. They don't like people who appear on Celebrity Big Brother for the same reason. They love to hate them, sort of. But if they could shut them up, they would, or if they could somehow take them. If you could somehow, I often had fantasies when I was working in the paper. You see these celebrity articles, and it is a kind of. I don't think I'm a begrudger, but I often resented these people taking up space in the paper. I used to want to populate the paper with ordinary people. I'd rather interview people who weren't famous and had ordinary lives, because I
Mm.
was sick of the kind of PR thing and celebrity thing. But I think Ian Bailey had that kind of. He was a self-promoter and a self-publicist, and I think his colleagues in the newspaper business in Britain might have just kept him out of the papers for that reason, even though it was a fascinating story. They'd rather lose that story than give that guy any more airtime or any more exposure in the paper.
it's a really nice insight into the mind of a journalist or a newspaper journalist there. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about Private Eye previously and Irish versions of it. I think it's always hard to predict what's going to be a story and what's going to be a big story and what's just going to not get into the papers at all. It's very difficult to predict sometimes.
But I mean, I think a lot of journalists would say that they're sick of the PR-led stuff and they're sick of the self-promoters. And we used to have blacklists in the tabloid papers of people, who used to ring up with every story that came out. There was one guy, I'm not going to mention his name, but every story that came up, I don't even know where he is now. Every story that came up, he would be involved in it, and he was just an ordinary man. But no matter what it was, I mean, there could be an earthquake in say Japan, and he would somehow have a relative who used to live in that town. There'd be a famine in Africa, and he'd know somebody, the local priest that would be a brother of some, fellow that he knew or something. There would be a tenuous link, or he would have visited the place. I don't know what I don't know where the man is now. I think he was middle age at the time, so he might be, I don't know where he is. But anyway, but we all have these people in the newspapers. There's a blacklist of them, and there were certain models as well, and Z-list celebrities that we used to get sick of, but they used to get the space because obviously the advertising was paid for, and you put them in the paper, and then somewhere an ad would pop up and somebody would take it. So that was different. But the self promoters, every community has these people too. I mean, that there's an Elvis Presley in every community. Nobody minds them for some reason. Nobody minds giving the Elvis guide because they're usually nice people. But there's another type
Mm.
of self promoter in every community, and everyone knows them. Everyone has the local person who's in the news all the time. And it could be anything. I mean, it could be a protest or something about something, and they'll kind of take over the megaphone, and they might have no interest in the cause. They just want to be there.
In Sophie's case, it's pretty obvious why we're still talking about her.
Mm.
It's kind of obvious why she's still in the news as well, because there's been so many documentaries over the last sort of 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
And we need to talk about the Jim Sheridan film, which is now a film that's come out about the case. Although it's an unusual interpretation, isn't it? Or it's an unusual way of presenting it. Have you got any thoughts on that film?
Yeah, I saw it, and I thought, I know Jim Sheridan has had made many great films. He's a brilliant filmmaker, but I wouldn't say it's one of his best. I think it just I think he meant it with the best. He made it with the best of intentions, and it was kind of a labor of love for him to make this. He wanted to clear Ian Bailey's name, and that's what it was. But he let that take over, and I think maybe he should have stepped back. And he appeared in the film, and he also set it all. He kind of used the formula of 12 Angry Men. He set it all in a jury room, and I think it could have needed a bit more drama. It came a bit flat because they were all, yeah. Even though the acting was great, the script writing was great, and the passions between them all. There was a character who was supposed to be a juror, and she was very similar to Sophie, and it was like as if Sophie had come alive and had appeared as a juror. Then there was another guy. There was a guy played by the actor John Connors, who's an Irish traveller, by the way. I don't know if that's relevant, but he's kind of known for that. That's what he's known as. But he was the angry father, very kind of traditional father type. So he would be kind of angry on behalf of this young woman who'd been killed. He was kind of like how he was angry at Ian Bailey, and the way a typical Irish father would be angry at this womanizer, because Ian Bailey was a womanizer, and he was he was known for kind of going after young women and all this. So I think the whole thing was it was Jim Sheridan trying to shoehorn his own feelings into this movie, and I think it was a mistake. I think it kind of it's the one film in his whole filmmaking history that didn't work, that fell flat. It didn't even get a prize at the Galway Film Festival, which there were films by younger directors who were less experienced, and they got prizes. It didn't even get a placement at all, which is surprising. So I'm sure he's kind of he must be thinking back on this and regretting it, because his documentary before that, Murder of the Cottage, was much better. And he could have made a big feature film out of this. He could have made just done it the traditional way and had actors playing the parts. Also, the character he got to play, Ian Bailey, he got an Irish actor to play him who is a great actor, but he doesn't look anything or sound anything like Ian Bailey. So he was silent throughout it, actually. But I mean, we know him so much for his parts in Irish movies that he really, I mean, all you can think of is that this actor and not Ian Bailey. So it wasn't fair on the actors. Yeah, I remember him for something else. I remember him from The Family, I think it is, when he played
Oh,
yeah, but I didn't watch. I wasn't as Trekkie, but yeah, he actually used to go out with someone who was a Trekkie, and he remembered Star Trek all right. But yeah, I mean, he carrying a bit of baggage. Then people know him in other roles, and to get him to play this character, I think he should have got someone like Aidan Turner or something, Poldark, someone like that
Mm.
with Bailey, someone who had these kind of dark, brooding features.
Well, from our perspective, the Sophie actress Vicky Krieps is pretty much unknown in England. So I think having unknowns in this sort of thing can really help. You don't want a
Oh yeah,
big
she was
star in
great.
there, do you?
They were all, and they were all great in it. And she actually could have. When I saw her, I thought she could actually play Sophie. She really could. She could
Mm.
play her in a straight feature film. But it's just that it was just the format. I don't think it worked. I think it just wasn't. It wouldn't engage the imagination enough. A jury room, even though there was one scene where they went out to the location, and with a haunting song at the end. It was beautiful. But I still think they needed it was a film that didn't really engage the emotions and it should have.
Yeah, it's not been released here yet. I wonder if that's partly why they're waiting for their moment, or maybe it'll go straight onto TV here. I don't know.
I say
I
so.
know they had a festival in America as well, but yeah, it's a shame. It's a shame actually if that's the case. I got the sense, even in Murder at the Cottage, which I do agree was brilliant, the TV
Yeah,
series, the 5 or 6 parts, he'd almost got a bit too personally involved in this case. He said at the time that it was a case he'd been aware of for 20 or 30 years since it happened,
yeah.
because it was so famous in Ireland, and obviously he still lives there most of the time, I guess. And
Well, he doesn't live anywhere. He lives in Dublin. But I mean, West Cork is a world apart from Dublin. But I think nearly every journalist who's written about this even has somehow has formed a strong opinion. I mean, I've done this too. Most of them have formed the opinion that Ian Bailey is guilty. But I think meeting Ian Bailey, because he's such a powerful character, it would bring out. I'm sure if I met him, people have told me if you had met him, you would have found him intimidating. So, I mean, maybe I would have, and then I would have been prejudiced. So I wanted to step back from this. But I did speak to him online. I mean, that was all it was. We had kind of calls. I mean, we had video calls. During the pandemic, and shortly after the pandemic, I think it was actually, it was 2021 when I had my first actual real. I spoke to him on the phone before that, but I wasn't physically in his presence, even though, just like talking to you, I'm not physically in your presence, but apparently if you are in his presence, he's very intimidating. But that doesn't make him a murderer, and I think I would have been that would have been a mistake then, because I would have had a flawed, I would have prejudice against him then, probably. I don't know. We had Jules Thomas managed to live with him for all these years, and she wasn't intimidated by him, and her daughters don't believe he did it, even though they hated him.
no, yeah, her daughters were no fan of his, but they don't think he's a killer.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, well, there's something about that. We're going to move on to talk about the Garda cold case investigation and whether that's even doing anything at the moment. There have been some things going on with that this year, but certainly in a TV documentary, people take sides quite quickly. But in the cold light of day, the justice system is supposed to be objective, and one of the things about this case is that they were never really objective. Some of the guys were thinking it was Ian even at the crime scene on the day it happened, almost like I can never understand why they jumped to that conclusion quite as quickly as that.
Because he wasn't liked. Yeah, but when he'd just been, it had only been just shortly before Toby was killed. Ian had been arrested for battering his partner. And I know the thing is, though, there are loads of wife batterers in Ireland that there were at the time, and there actually are husband batterers, and I mean, there's an awful lot of domestic violence going on between men and women in Ireland, and a lot of the men on the female violence against men doesn't get reported because men are ashamed of it, but it's a tremendous amount of it. But there was also, West Cork, that peninsula. There were loads of wife beaters people were talking about in the area, and yet they zoomed in on him because he was just the person that rubbed people up the wrong way for other reasons. He was arrogant, and I suppose being kind of British didn't help as well in an area where. There were British people there who had a kind of a thing they so desperately wanted to fit in with the locals. They'd almost be anti-British themselves. And then they were acting kind of less arrogant and trying to downplay their Britishness, sort of. And then they were almost apologising for having their ancestors having colonised Ireland, which is ridiculous. But then there were Irish people. The IRA was active and still is, in the area. The breakaway IRA groups that believe Sinn Féin, have let them down. They're still active in Cork, and they're all over the country, but there's an awful lot of them in Cork. And then of course there's just this thing of him being a handsome man and being a bit too big for his boots, and he really he didn't just. It was fine if he had downplayed it or he acted humble, but he was a braggart, and he was a bit obnoxious, and he used to flirt with the women. I mean, any woman, came into his orbit, he'd flirt with just for the fun of it, just to annoy her boyfriend, and because he could, he's like the male equivalent of this bimbo girl that goes around like flirting with all the men, and I mean, every woman hates that type of woman, but I can see how every man would hate Ian Bailey as well, and some women would hate him too because he kind of maybe caused a row with them and their boyfriend or something, or because he didn't flirt with some of them, maybe the ones that he didn't flirt with felt, oh, he's flirting with everyone except this, so me. That's what they say. So there's a bit of sour grapes there, wasn't there?
Nobody really seemed to. I can't think of anybody now looking back who came out who actually liked him. Even his sort of friends or associates were like, you know, yeah, he's a bit difficult. He is this. He is an alcoholic. He's got all these issues.
Yeah.
Doesn't he wasn't an easy to like
He was tone deaf.
character.
No, he was definitely tone deaf, in his behaviour. He didn't realise how
Mm.
offensive he was, I think. He used to think he was popular when he was really offending people.
So what can you remember about the Garda cold case review? I remember in the summer there was all this stuff about DNA and a new company that's got a new way of harvesting DNA from the forensic evidence. So the good news is they have retained some of the forensic evidence. Some of it was lost. Some like the amazing gate, the enormous gate that somebody went missing. But there is DNA. There are Sophie's clothes still available, and they have harvested this DNA. And I think we spoke at the time that we were a little bit skeptical about the value of this, and
Yeah.
will it just show Sophie's DNA and that'll be it? We don't know yet.
Yeah, it's been inconclusive, I think, because otherwise they'd be shouting about it. Why aren't they shouting about it? So I presume they didn't find anything of note on it. So all I can think of is, I can. I mean, I still think Alfie did it, and I think he's the only person who could have done it. But I certainly don't think. I think if it had been Ian Bailey, I mean, they'd be shouting it from the rooftops now. I mean, there's no reason not to. So I think
Yeah.
the MBAC system it's a great idea, but I mean it doesn't mean that it doesn't, it's not foolproof. I mean he later, I mean also Ian and Jules were they did actually go along to the scene and they were leaning over the body, and Ian, she was taking photographs and Ian was beside her. So I mean Ian Bailey's DNA could have got on the body at that moment even, but even if they do find his evidence, any evidence, but I'm sure that I mean, I've seen forensics talking about this. There's good evidence and there's bad evidence. There's kind of misleading evidence as well. I mean, everyone. I mean, you could get, you could have. I'm sure we all have DNA from loads of different sources on us at any one time. Because we've been in shops, we've handled things that other people have handled. So I don't really know how much what this shows, but I'd say if there was any good evidence or any evidence at all that Ian Bailey's DNA was on her.
Yeah, it was some months ago. They'd be shouting about that because they were shouting about the thing happening and the collection going on, and this guy coming from America to help them work
Yeah.
the system and that. So I think by now we would probably have heard of something, wouldn't we? And that's been going on for some years, actually. Yeah, I don't know what I expected. I really thought they would thoroughly go over everything like from the beginning, and maybe they have been doing that. Some people obviously thought they would just come out with new ways to blame Ian for it.
Yeah, well, the conspiracy theorists will always say something like that. I don't believe it's a conspiracy at this stage. I believe the only conspiracy was kind of a bit of shame that they made a mess of it and they just didn't want to admit it.
Mm.
But I don't think there was some massive conspiracy to blame him. I mean, he wasn't that important that anyone would want to blame him. It was just he just was disliked and he was an easy person. It was a bit of laziness, I suppose. And a
Mm.
bit of, but it was genuinely well intentioned. I mean, it's unconscious bias. We can anyone can have unconscious bias, and I suppose detectives are not immune to that anymore. It could happen to anyone, and I know they're better trained than they used to be. But at the same time, the old school detectives used to use their instincts, and maybe that's being lost. I don't know. They're trained to be more rigid in their methodology now, but they used to go on hunches. So I don't believe there was any malice, and I don't believe there was any intention to mislead people. I just think that they went on what they knew, and the locals also got caught up in the hysteria. And it becomes a self-fulfilling thing when you tell somebody, like when you show someone a photo of it and you put something into their mind, you think that looks like so and so, and suddenly, I mean, I was looking at this thing last night. They said a photo of it about Susie Lamplugh, alleged killer, And he said he looked at the image of the person. And no, he doesn't. But if you were thinking that he was guilty, you would think that.
It must be so tempting to do when it's your job to solve these things, and there's a lot of pressure from the media and from the public as well,
Yeah.
which bordered on the hysterical at the time, even. I think partly because it was over Christmas as well. It really affected people, and people were afraid of this guy attacking somebody else, right? They couldn't rule out that he might attack somebody else, which never happened, of course.
Yeah, and because he was so big as well, he was like the bogeyman, he's this big monster. And the idea of him stomping across the rough countryside over a mountain to kill this woman, in a frenzy of lust, when the poor man was probably just drunk and had a hangover when all this was happening, But it just beggars belief. And then of course, Alfie didn't hear anything. I mean, his wife and her they were watching a film on TV, A Few Good Men. So I think you'd hear somebody screaming. Maybe they were engrossed in the film, but I mean, how do they not hear the screaming? She must have been killed very quickly. I still think it was Alfie. You know, I don't believe she had a chance. I think he just hit her over the head, and that's why there was no screaming. That's why his partner. That's why Shirley didn't hear the screaming. I think.
That's the last question we've got before us on this actually is I know you think it's Alfie. And he is the only man that we can place at the scene, right? That we can definitely place there because he lived there. Um, I go back and forth whether it was a stranger, but then what could possibly have taken a stranger to that level of anger?
I mean, and such a remote place. I mean, to travel such a distance to kill this woman. And if they had come from France or if it had been some sort of a grudge, they would have had to have been there. I mean, there was a report of a man pulling in at a petrol station, and then there were kind of reports that didn't quite add up as well. But I just don't believe there were lots of French tourists in the area too, and there were lots of French people living in the area. I mean, the woman that pulled up at the petrol station mightn't have even been Sophie. But I don't believe she had a lover with her. And I mean, the guy that they blamed had an alibi anyway. So maybe, honestly, it was some other lover that she had with her. But even then, how would he have got away at Christmas? I mean, in a strange country and to get away from such a remote place. And why would he have killed her down there, in that remote? Why would she have run away from her house? Why wouldn't she have picked up the phone? And why would the other thing is Alfie? Why did Alfie go out of his safe house and walk across to warn her instead of phoning her? She had a phone, he had a phone. Why did he not phone her and say, "Look, there's a weirdo outside. Are you okay? My wife found a body down the end of the drive." When they didn't know it was Sophie, when Charlie didn't know it was Sophie. I mean, why not? Why did he go down to Sophie's house? And he wanted an excuse to touch the handle. I think so he'd have an alibi for you'd have an excuse for his DNA being on the door handle. Why did she come over? All I can assume is she came over to have it out with Alfie because she knew he'd be there. She knew she'd catch him at Christmas. And she wanted to have this row with him over him entering her cottage when she was away and using her bath. I think it's an appalling thing to do, to go into someone's house, without their permission. But I mean, I was talking to someone, an ex-colleague, and he was saying that he has a holiday home, and he was in the house on one night with his wife. They'd arrived the night before, and they woke up the next morning to find to hear a smell of a big fry up, and then they saw this guy standing at the end of their bed. It was one of the neighbours, and he said, "Oh, yeah, I made you your breakfast." And you couldn't make this up, but he said his wife was. I said, "Oh, I'd be terrified and I'd go mad." He said, "My wife said we're selling the holiday home. We're never going back there again." And he said that I don't know what the harm was, but so there is a kind of thing in rural Ireland where people think it's not harmful, but you know. So I didn't see anything wrong with entering her cottage, but she did, and she came over to have it out with him. I don't blame her.
I know somebody said that they didn't have any hot water at the time, and Sophie did, so that's why he had a bath in her cottage.
I
But
mean, he's a wealthy man. He could have gone into
it's,
he could have gone into Skibbereen, which has a nice hotel. He could have gone in there and just booked into a room for the night until he got his water fixed.
I don't believe that's disputed either. I think it is a fact that he did do this, and he went and used her
Yeah.
cottage, and it just gives me a sense of arrogance, actually. It's like entitlement.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I think it's just great. I think it really a massive sense of entitlement. But someone like that would fly. And also the cannabis dealing. She warned him loads of times. I mean, she had the children. She had her son and her son's friends staying with her, and she gave out to him because she said, "You're using this. The children could come across it." So she didn't want her children to even come anywhere near cannabis. And this guy had a grow house and a bit of a business going with another guy, and he also so he didn't care about that either. I mean, would you not care about even if you didn't care yourself? Would you not care about children? So I don't know. It just seems to me that that he was pushing all sorts of boundaries. He was very inappropriate the way he's behaving.
And he wasn't Irish either, was he? He'd been there a lot longer, but he'd come from England at some point in the past.
Yeah, I think he was from Dublin originally, but he'd lived in England. Yeah, his partner
Ah,
is English. Yeah, but he was
okay.
from Dublin originally, all right. But he wasn't. Yeah, and generally Dublin people are not welcome in rural Ireland. But of all the people, generally the Dublin people are not. But I mean, he fitted in because I think it's because he was wealthy and all this, and he was a
Mm.
restaurateur and he was giving loads of jobs and contributing to charities in the area. So you can get away with an awful lot if you have loads of money.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So we'll draw the Sophie episode to a close. I think I've sort of reached the view on this that we're not really ever going to find out now. I think Alfie's died, Ian's died. A lot of the key individuals have died. The police officers are dying off who were involved in this at the time. It just feels like, we were talking off camera about CCTV and DNA and things, and there's just not enough evidence in any direction, is there? It's just never going to get solved.
Oh, no, I don't think you'll ever find out who killed poor Sophie. It's sad, but and her father died as well, and he never found out. So
We do tend to see that here, actually, when the parents particularly die.
yeah.
So that's a sibling maybe that's pushing things forward, but once the family are no longer able to push the case and to get the profile in the press, it does seem to get forgotten about.
Her uncle has still got this organization going, and Jean-Pierre Gazzo, he's running an organization to. He's never given up the search, and it's actually being funded by her late husband's estate. I think her late husband put money into it, so they are making a genuine effort, but and they have. I believe they are keeping an open mind, even though the locals, they have said that they have said stuff about Ian Bailey, but I think they would be open. They would. I think he said to me, of course, he'd be open to any new information that would come out. But it's good that they have this organisation and they have Brigitte Chapuis or so. I'm not. I think she's English, but her name sounds very French. But anyway, she's a forensic scientist, and she used to work with police in Britain, and she's working with them. So you never know. They might get somewhere with it.
Yeah, I've got emails from her, right? She's a very respected forensic expert, so it's good to have somebody like that involved. I mean, my interest is just as a member of the public, effectively. I kind of got into this almost by accident, just started writing about it after seeing the Jim Sheridan drama. But it is a fascinating case. Well, we will pause that one there. So thanks, Geraldine, for joining us on the Sophie episode.